LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the April 18th edition of LiberalViewer Monday Media Mix-Up. Thanks for joining me. Today I'll be using the 13 best most newsworthy clips I've gathered from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for what should be a really informative, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all today. My topic, as you can see from the title of the video, the main topic is, will Russia go nuclear in Ukraine? And I will have some newsmakers addressing that question, including Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, and also the Chancellor of Austria, who just met in person with Vladimir Putin earlier this week. So you can stay tuned for that. But first, for the political comedy this week, I want to address a different topic that was covered by most of the Sunday morning news analysis shows, although not in a really good way. The topic I want to cover is what I call copaganda surrounding the New York subway shooting that happened in this last week, where luckily nobody was killed. And you may remember I talked about copaganda briefly when I did my Monday show after a Sunday where there were a bunch of worshipers in a Jewish synagogue taken hostage. And on Sunday there was all this breathless coverage of how the police burst in and saved the hostages. But by Monday it turned out, well, actually the rabbi hit the hostage taker with a chair and they ran out to safety before the cops came in. And that's the kind of thing that happens. As you know, I used to be a public defender, a criminal defense attorney for people who are charged with crimes and can't afford an attorney. And one of the things I learned from kind of being an insider on a lot of criminal cases that the public defender's office covered is that a lot of the facts you hear about crimes are things leaked to the press by the police themselves. The police and the press have a really good working relationship. They have, journalists have a lot of police sources, and they even the non-Fox News media is loath to criticize the police. And I'll be showing an example of that after I show this the way that SNL parodied the propaganda response from New York City Mayor Eric Adams, who's a former police officer, just won as mayor of New York City this last year. He's played by Chris Red in the clip I will talk about. This is a long cold open about the Easter Bunny. There's a good impersonation of Donald Trump at the end. As usual, you can click on a link under sources in the video description, watch the entire cold open. Here's the clip I want to talk about after we watch it together over here.
It's me, Eric Adams. And don't adjust your television set. I am this handsome, you understand? Spring is sprung, New York, and I'm also sprung too, looking at all these baddies in sundresses. Nah, I'm just playing, unless you like that. But for real, this Easter, I got the best news of all New York. We got him. We got the shooter. Sure, it took 30 hours and the suspect turned himself in, but we got him. Case closed, subways fixed, ride without fear. And I'm not just holding a press conference about this either. I'm throwing a parade, y'all. Like we do when the Yankees win the World Series or when the Mets finish a season. In conclusion, shooter caught, sexy back, violent crime way up. Bitch, I'm from New York. It's Eric Adams. I run this town. Bye.
And anyway, there's some other funny parts to that cold open. But the point I wanted to make showing that was that they parodied the "We Got Him" moment that Eric Adams, the mayor of New York, if you were watching cable news when all this happened, I watched that press conference, and he did the whole "We Got Him" moment, and then the police commissioner came on and talked about how they shrank his world, and that's why they finally caught him after a Crime Stopper called in that he was in this McDonald's. And then it turned out the Crime Stopper tip came from the guy himself, and the police didn't spot him. It was actually this video installer guy, Zach, who became a brief internet star, and you probably all know that. But so that did get parodied over on Saturday Night Live's in the cold open on Saturday night. Then Sunday morning over on MSNBC, I always watch the Sunday Show with Jonathan Capehart. I'm actually a big Jonathan Capehart fan. I really like his analysis and his show, and I hate to be a critic, but he showed the "We Got Him" moment, and also the one from Police Commissioner Sewell, whose first name I'm blanking on right now, but though I have a clip of her coming up on this week with George Stephanopoulos in just a moment. But here you see Jonathan Capehart on MSNBC the next morning. He's got New York City Mayor Eric Adams on. He shows the "We Got Him" moment, and then the "We shrank his world" part of the press conference. Never asks him about the copaganda, about how the cops exaggerated their role in catching the guy who turned himself in and was kind of captured by the video installer guy, Zach. So this is not a good moment from Jonathan Capehart in the clip I wanted to show you next over here.
My fellow New Yorkers, we got him. We got him.
We were able to shrink his world quickly. There was nowhere left for him to run.
Frank R. James was arrested Wednesday and faces a federal terrorism charge after allegedly shooting 10 people and injuring 13 on a Brooklyn subway a day earlier. The attack comes as NYPD statistics show a 60% increase in overall crime in New York City compared to this time last year. And it highlights the challenge faced by the man who declared public safety his #1 priority. That man joins me now, the 110th mayor of the city of New York, Eric Adams. Mr. Mayor, welcome back to the Sunday Show.
Thank you very much. It's good to be on with you.
After last week's subway shooting, how are you addressing the city's rising crime, especially regarding public transportation safety, which, according to NYC crime statistics, crime on New York City transit is up 73%?
And that's kind of a softball question because it leads into, well, we need more cops, we need more resources, which of course is the answer. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, the causes of crime, I mean, there are a lot of well-known causes of crime that have to do with poverty and lack of opportunity and all sorts of other things. It doesn't mean that there's like everyone who's poor becomes a criminal. That is not true, but it's a contributing factor, and it's kind of a complicated thing, and it has very little to do with how many police are on the street. That's the thing, and it's almost like, you know, they're people who do like rain dances, and you know, if there's not enough rain, we need more rain dancers, and then if there's a lot of rain, see the good job all the rain dancers are doing. It's almost like that's the relationship between. I mean, it's not exactly that much of a disconnect, but it gets pretty close there. And Jonathan Capehart just let Eric Adams get away with not really answering anything about the propaganda that they put out. In fact, one thing I thought, I didn't even notice this till that last time I played the clip for you all. He said that Frank James was given a terrorism charge. And I saw that reported on a lot of news stations. And the federal charge, I mean, it does have terrorism in the title of the statute, but it's like terrorist and other violent attacks on railroads and other forms of mass transit. And in order to be guilty of it, all you have to do is like set off a smoke bomb in the subway. That, I mean, that is, because that's like a hazardous chemical, that's part of it. And then if someone is like harmed in during the thing, then it becomes like an aggravated felony where you actually can get life in prison. So I'm not saying it's nothing, but it's not terrorism in terms of what most people think in terms of terrorism. So that's also kind of bogus. And then before I finish up with this whole propaganda topic and get to the main topic of whether Russia's going to go nuclear in Ukraine, I want to show the one other news organization that had the chance to interview the mayor of New York and the police commissioner after this whole propaganda incident. And George Stephanopoulos was the interviewer, and even he, it's the lightest questioning on that topic. You'll see he doesn't even ask Eric Adams. He asks the police commissioner, is like, what more can you tell us about why he turned himself in? Wink, wink. Like, can you mention the fact that you didn't really get him? But you'll see in the follow-up question, there's sort of a slight hint in the follow-up question that he asked to the mayor, Eric Adams, and I'll talk about all that a little more after we watch that final clip on the copaganda topic together over here.
Investigation.
And Commissioner Sewell, what do we know about why he turned himself in?
So I think the fact that he called and turned himself in is evidence by the fact that we were kind of closing in around him. There were a number of avenues we pursued to try to locate Mr. James. We disseminated his picture, made the strategic decision to disseminate his picture, and we had a number of people looking for him, hundreds of detectives looking for him. But I think one of the key factors also is our force multiplier, which are the eyes and ears of our incredible New Yorkers, and we were able to bring him into custody.
Mayor Adams, in many ways, Frank James was hiding in plain sight even before the attack. He was arrested several times. He had YouTube videos packed with hate and suggestions of violence. Do we need a better way to track individuals like this before they take this violent action? And whose responsibility is that?
And like I said, that was just a faint hint. Like, he was hiding in plain sight before he committed the crime. Hint, hint, he also was hiding in plain sight for 30 hours while you had thousands of cops searching for him, and he sat in a McDonald's for a large part of the day waiting to be caught, and he has significant mental illness, it sounds like, and anyway, but so there was a little hint of a criticism in that follow-up question, hiding in plain sight, and a hint of a criticism in, what was her name, Kicha, the Police Commissioner Sewell there, saying, he was what can you tell me more about him turning himself in? So, but I'm always amazed. This is not just like a Fox News bias. This is bias in so much media, so much local media, because like I was saying before, as I learned when I was a criminal defense attorney, a public defender, criminal defense attorneys, especially public defenders, will very rarely talk to people from the press. So when you read press stories where there are all these accounts, it's almost all coming from the cops and the prosecutors, and they're spinning stuff to try to, I would say taint the jury pool, but to get their version of events out there. And the first version of events from George Floyd, there was some initial report that was totally wrong, and if you had just gone by the initial report that the police gave and that was repeated on the local news before the video came out, it sounded like someone who was resisting arrest, etc., and nothing about the knee on the neck for all that time. And anyway, I don't want to go into all of that, but I did want to get to the main topic and start with the news summaries from longest to shortest. I thought ABC had this week with George Stephanopoulos had probably, I talk about the one that is the news summary that's most emotive, that really tugs at your heartstrings the most, and that really matters in this kind of wartime. It's almost also like propaganda, I suppose, because there's a lot of stuff going on from the corporate news media trying to get people to see the brutality of the war, and it's definitely pro-Ukrainian and anti-Russian, but that has a lot to do with the facts on the ground, and they're trying to show you the facts on the ground. And like I was saying when I started introducing this first ABC News summary, the reporter, it's an introduction from George Stephanopoulos, and then James Longman, who's in Dnipro, which is close to the Donbass region, sort of in between the east and the south, and anyway, he kind of explains it, and he talks in depth about the brutality of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the sinking of the Moskva, which was big news, and a lot of continuing evidence of Russian brutality, all of which I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that news summary together from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos yesterday. over here.
Good morning. Welcome to This Week. As we come on the air this holiday weekend, Russia is making major advances in eastern Ukraine. Overnight, Ukrainian President Zelensky warned that conditions in the southeastern port of Mariupol were as severe as possible, with the city on the cusp of falling to Russian forces. After weeks of attacks that have leveled Mariupol, Russia is poised to gain a strategic land bridge to Crimea as it prepares for a renewed assault on the eastern Donbas region. With the war now entering its 8th week, both sides digging in for what could be a decisive battle. Our foreign correspondent James Longman starts us off from the border of the Donbas region. Good morning, James.
Yeah, good morning, George. This is the Dnipro River, which runs almost down the center of Ukraine. And just about every town and city east of where I am now is under the Russian threat. And that includes the city of Mariupol, where fighting rages this morning. The sinking of the Moskva may push Vladimir Putin to unleash a deeper fury on the east. This week, Russia suffered its biggest military loss of the invasion so far. Vladimir Putin, perhaps his biggest ever humiliation. The flagship of his Black Sea fleet sunk by 2 Ukrainian missiles. Moscow says it wasn't an attack. They blamed it on fire and stormy seas instead. But the Pentagon agreeing with the Ukrainian claim. And this Russian strike on a missile factory outside Kyiv was the closest Russia got to admitting they'd been hit. The Moskva was named for the Russian capital. It's sinking an uncomfortable metaphor for what's playing out here. An outdated war machine being outmaneuvered by Ukrainian daring. Heavy fighting in Donetsk, as this video on social media shows, the battle now intensifying in the east. And this week, a major claim.
Yes, I called it genocide. Putin is just trying to wipe out the idea of even being able to be a Ukrainian.
With every body retrieved in Bucha, the forensic evidence of war crimes mounts. French experts joined the effort this week. We saw the work they faced firsthand. I'm looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bodies in this tiny room in this basement where Ukrainians say people have been tortured. Galina Machoshko's son Serhiy was among those victims. He was helping evacuees, hiding in a summer camp when the Russians arrived. They came like a hurricane, causing so much pain. And for what, she asks. You can't even imagine this pain, she says. My soul is crying. And in the southern city of Zaporizhia, we heard chilling accounts of life in Mariupol, a city under siege since this war began. Satellite images show large deployments of Russian troops moving east, repositioning armored vehicles and support equipment just across the border of the Donbas region. Military experts say Russia is trying to create an arc of occupation from Kyiv in the north to Mariupol in the south. They want to form a land bridge with Crimea, which was annexed in 2014. Putin citing the need to combat the NATO threat as European leaders continue a show of force. The presidents of Poland, Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia travelled to Kyiv this week to meet with President Zelensky. And Finland and Sweden, traditionally neutral, indicating they may be moving closer to NATO membership.
We have to really think through what is best for Sweden and our security and our peace.
Ahead of the expected Russian assault in the east, President Biden announced another massive military aid package, sending an additional $800 million of military equipment to Ukraine, including long-range artillery systems, armored personnel carriers, drones and helicopters. The US has committed nearly $2.6 billion to Ukraine since the beginning of the war and is even considering sending an administration official to Kyiv.
Well, we're making that decision now.
And everyone we meet here tells us how much they feel that help is needed, like Sergei, just back from the front for this much-needed reunion. I'm doing this for them, he says. But the impact of what he's had to do is clear.
What's it been like fighting?
It's scary, but we're holding on, he says. The weapons, we need them desperately. You see all this destruction, and then a little man somewhere 1,500 miles away is telling us that what's happening, what happened in Bucha, is fake. Sadness briefly healed with a few happy moments, but Sergei will soon be back to the fight with fresh memories of what he's been fighting for. In many ways, this war has been all about Mariupol. It is the bridge between two areas that Russians already dominate, Donbass in the north and Crimea in the south. But if they do take full control, the price that city has paid may never be fully known. George.
James Longman, thanks. And we are joined now by the Ukrainian Prime Minister, Denis Shmyhal. Mr. Prime Minister, thank you.
And actually, that's not a bad interview if you want to watch the Ukrainian Prime Minister there interviewed. The foreign minister is actually another program. I don't have the Prime Minister or the Foreign Minister, but I have Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky coming up talking about the possible use of nuclear weapons by Russia. But you saw there James Longman, I think, really got the human element. You heard like people crying. You saw little kids. You saw also a fairly good map of, not as good as the David Petraeus analysis I showed last week. That I put that near the beginning of last week's live stream if you want to go back and watch that, in terms of exactly how Russia's redeploying its forces north and then east to come back down to the south and take that eastern part of Ukraine, the Donbass region, and link it up with Crimea. And also a really good point that James Longman makes at the end there about how it looks like Mariupol, which is kind of like the key point for that land bridge between the east and the south and Crimea, that it looks like it's about to fall after, what is it, like a 50-day siege where like no ammunition, no food coming in, and they're still holding out. And if they do fall, that all the evidence of what's been going on there during the siege is probably going to be wiped out. And apparently there have been many civilians killed during this siege, not just because it's more than just a siege. There's also all sorts of shelling and warfare going on. And anyway, I thought that was captured well by James Longman in that last news summary, as well as the strategic importance of Mariupol. And also the CBS News Face the Nation news summary is similar and very good. And this is Margaret Brennan has, well, I noticed that a lot of the news anchors started wishing people a happy Easter and Passover. Margaret Brennan actually included Ramadan. I think Jake Tapper near the end of the program may have mentioned Ramadan at one point. But this news summary from Margaret Brennan is supplemented by a report from the CBS reporter in Kyiv, and I will talk about that a little more in juxtaposition to the last news summary after we watch the CBS News Face the Nation news summary together over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. On a day when we're honoring the holy holidays of Easter, Passover, and Ramadan, it's difficult to come to grips with the bleak news this morning. Overnight, there have been mass shootings at a shopping mall in Columbia, South Carolina, and at a party in East Allegheny, part of Pittsburgh. In Jerusalem, there were more clashes at the holy site of Haram al-Sharif Temple Mount between Israeli police and Palestinian protesters. In North Korea, pictures released by the state news agency show Kim Jong-un celebrating what appears to be the successful test fire of a tactical guided weapon. In the first outdoor mass since the pandemic began, Pope Francis said the world is marking an Easter of war, and he urged peace. We begin, as we always do, with the news, but we do hope that you'll stay with us through our second half hour when we focus on some of the efforts being made to help those who are suffering all around the world. Our Chris Livesay is up first, reporting from Kyiv. Chris?
Good morning. As Vladimir Putin refocuses his land war on the east, the Russian president is reminding us he can still strike Ukraine wherever he wants by air. Russia has increased missile strikes here in the capital and continues to pound major cities on the front lines. The Kyiv region, now a graveyard. The bodies of more than 900 civilians have been found in and around the capital, police say. The killing continues at Kharkiv, close to Russia's border, where overnight shelling of a residential area killed 7 people, including a 7-month-old, Ukraine's local authorities say. But nowhere is the misery more total than Mariupol. Thousands have been killed in weeks of airstrikes, artillery, even starvation. Russia has now claimed victory. If true, we may never know the full scale of horror. But Chernihiv in northern Ukraine offers a glimpse. It too was encircled by Russian forces, cut off from food, water, and electricity for weeks. until Ukrainian forces, dramatically outgunned, pushed them back. In one remarkable instance, shooting down this bomber, it crashed into this house, killing one man inside. But shockingly, no more. Its payload failing to detonate on impact, landing on Nikolai's doorstep instead. We heard the air raid sirens, he says. I was just sitting and praying when all of a sudden there was a huge boom in flames. The two pilots ejected. One survived, and not just anyone. Here he is posing with Vladimir Putin and his ally, Bashar al-Assad, the president of Syria, where this ace carried out airstrikes. Soon after his capture, Russia pulled back its forces from Chernihiv, and what was supposed to be a minor speed bump on the way to Kyiv turned into a major setback for Russia, though not without a devastating cost to Ukraine. Chernihiv offers an unprecedented look at war. Never before, not even in Syria, have events of battle been so closely documented, thanks to cell phone footage, geolocating tools, and a local population that's incredibly tech-savvy. Margaret?
Chris Livesay, thank you. We go now to the Foreign Minister of Ukraine, Dnipro Kuleba. Minister, welcome back to the...
So yeah, I told you there'd be a foreign minister. There's a prime minister. There's a foreign minister from Ukraine, but I'm not showing those interviews. For CBS News Face the Nation, if you go down to the link under sources in the video description, it goes to the Face the Nation YouTube channel, where the whole program is split into clips, including the interview with the Ukrainian foreign minister, including Elizabeth Palmer reporting for some reason from Japan on the big coronavirus lockdowns in China, which is an important story that was only covered on Face the Nation, which I've mentioned a lot of times maybe should be called the COVID broadcasting system, because they were first and best on covering the pandemic way back in the beginning of 2020 when nobody really knew, and they were the first ones covering it. And at the time I said they're either overhyping it or they're the only ones covering the biggest story of the year, and to be number 2. Anyway, I say that so many times. But anyway, that's part of my analysis of CBS, and you can watch, like I said, the whole program on their YouTube channel for free. You saw there that their reporter in Kyiv got that Mariupol story and some of the brutality there, and even made the same point that the ABC reporter made, that if Russia takes that city, then they're going to cover up all the evidence, but then pivoted to talking about how, but we've seen from cities where the Ukrainians retook them after Russian forces had been in possession of them for some time, what kind of brutality took place there. Didn't make the point that the ABC reporter made about how Mariupol is like the key to the land bridge between the Donbass and Crimea, and I mean, it doesn't get them all the way to Odessa, but anyway. The next news summary is also pretty good. NBC News' Meet the Press. Chuck Todd doesn't have that. The one thing I forgot about that CBS News Face the Nation news summary, I forgot to mention before I showed it, so I didn't totally criticize that clip. That was kind of almost apocalyptic introduction from Margaret Brennan. All the things she talked about there. She talked about all the shootings in the U.S. and the clashes in Jerusalem and North Korea launching a missile and the Pope calling for peace is I don't know, the seventh seal or something. I don't know, but that was kind of weird. One weird part of Margaret Brennan's introduction, but she did mention Ramadan. Chuck Todd does not mention Ramadan. But he has Matt Bradley, their reporter, actually reporting from Bucha, which is one of the worst mass grave sites, and he shows some of the evidence they're collecting there, and talks about some of the same topics you saw in the previous news summaries, which I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that news summary together over here.
Good Sunday morning. Happy Easter and happy Passover. In Kyiv and across the country, between air raid sirens and emergency curfews, Ukrainian Jews gathered with their families this weekend for Passover Seders. Refugees celebrated across Europe, having to say next year in Ukraine. This morning at St. Peter's Square, the Pope said the world is marking an Easter of war, with Ukraine dragged into a cruel and senseless conflict. And there were processions through Lviv this morning as Ukrainians marked Palm Sunday. Orthodox Easter is celebrated next week. But overnight explosions rattled Kyiv and Kharkiv, missile strikes in retaliation after Ukrainian missiles sunk the flagship of Russia's fleet in the Black Sea. Real humiliating loss for the Russians. Now Russia is consolidating its forces in the east, staging attack helicopters at Ukraine's eastern border and sending new soldiers and artillery for a long campaign. The governor of the Donetsk region says Mariupol has been wiped off the face of the earth by Russian forces. And Russia is warning of unpredictable consequences directly to the United States through diplomatic channels if the United States and NATO continue to arm Ukraine. What is that a pretext for? All of this after the United States announced a new $800 million aid package that includes helicopters, Javelin missiles, and for the first time, much heavier artillery. But President Zelensky is still asking for more. In fact, he said this: "When some leaders ask me what weapons I need a moment to calm myself because I already told them the week before. It's Groundhog Day." NBC News foreign correspondent Matt Bradley is in Bucha this morning. And Matt, we thought this region was somewhat safe, and then overnight, cruise missiles hit Kyiv. What have you seen? What have you heard?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about cruise missiles that are landing outside of the capital city. And, you know, this city still is kind of lurching back to life despite some glimpses of the fighting still going on. The mayor of Kyiv just sort of shortened the curfew that had been in place for several weeks by a couple of hours, just as an indicator that things are kind of getting back to normal despite constantly hearing air raid sirens and the continued shelling outside the city. I'm outside of Kyiv right now, and as you can see, they're cleaning things up. I'm in something of a graveyard myself, but this one is for vehicles. If you can see just over my right shoulder here, Chuck, these are some of the Russian tanks that were recovered from the battlefield here in Bucha, totally burned out. But in front of me here are some of these civilian cars. The rest of these vehicles are for civilians, and, you know, a lot of this, you're seeing signs of, you know, surrender. This is a white flag, and we're seeing this over and over and over again, Chuck. White flags tied to cars that have been riddled with bullet holes, and in this case, it looks like shrapnel holes. A large munition blew up right here and clearly sprayed this car with shrapnel. This handwritten sign right here, it says Dieti. That means children. And we're seeing the same thing on this car here. A lot of these vehicles are going to be figuring into investigations into war crimes in the coming weeks and months. Chuck?
An important crime scene that Matt Bradley is at right now. Matt, thank you. This week, Austrian Chancellor Karl Nahamer became the first European leader to sit down in person with Vladimir Putin since the Russian invasion began. Austria is one of 6 EU countries that are not in NATO, and the country is facing questions about the official neutrality it has maintained since the Second World War. Earlier, I spoke with the Chancellor and asked him about that Putin visit. You've decided to visit.
And I will have a clip where the Chancellor of Austria there, Karl Nahamer, where he talks about whether Putin is getting good information, whether he might use nuclear weapons, whether he thinks he's winning the war, and he just he's like the first person to meet with Putin in person since the war started, like Chuck Todd said. So that's coming up in a few more clips. I thought it was interesting that that's the first time in that news summary and the only place in the news programs I saw a reference to Vladimir Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, making a reference to Groundhog Day, which one of my favorite movies. But I mean, parts of that movie are kind of grim, but at least they don't involve like warfare, like war crimes, and that is, I don't know, I hadn't really thought of Groundhog Day in that context, and I'm not sure I want to. And only other criticism of that news summary there is that the reporter they had there was actually in Bucha, and Matt Bradley, and Chuck Todd even said reporting to you from a crime scene, but all he showed was like cars with bullet holes and then like some burnt out tanks, and it seems like the two previous news summaries did a lot better job of like showing you the brutality of war than the guy who was actually reporting from Bucha. So I would say that, and at least all of the last three news summaries were actual journalistic news summaries, and my saying that is, for my regular viewers, that means we're about to see the Fox News Sunday non-news summary, because of course Fox News isn't really a news organization. If you want more background about that, you can watch my Fox News bias video playlist with over 200 examples to show how biased Fox News is, or you want to know why it's so biased, you can read this book over here. Gabriel Sherman's Loudest Voice in the Room tells the story of how Roger Ailes created Fox News to be a propaganda outlet for the Republican Party, which is what it is. So that's why what you're about to see, all the other news programs start covering Ukraine, and there'll be some mention of Ukraine here, but what they really focus on is Biden is in trouble, there's bad news for Biden is not doing a good job, and Democrats should be punished in the midterms this November. And that will also become kind of clear when I show you the clip of House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, along with the way they try to pump him up at the very beginning of the program, the little Fox News teaser. But those are the last two clips. If you want to see the real Fox News bias, wait for my last two news clips. And by the way, down in the video description, I put like summaries of all 13 of the clips, so you can read what clips are coming up and like switch around if you want to try to do that. But here's the Fox News Sunday news summary. Mike Emanuel, he's not the most biased of all the Fox News hosts, since Chris Wallace left and went over to CNN Plus, where apparently he's unhappy with his low viewership from stories I've seen. They've been doing these rotating Fox News Sunday hosts, and some of them are really biased. Mike Emanuel, he's more bland, but that blandness means that he doesn't really push back to some of the Republican talking points that I'll show in the last couple clips when he's talking to the House Republican Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy. But here he is with as Fox News has been wont to do, they do have a reporter in Ukraine, but they don't start with that person. Mike Emanuel does the introduction about how, bad things for Biden, and then goes to Lucas Tomlinson in Washington, D.C. to report on the politics of it all. Some mention of Ukraine, but it's more about, priming the Fox News viewers to vote against Democrats in the November midterms, in my opinion. And after we watch this news summary together, you can tell me your opinion. And here it is.
Hello again, and happy Easter from Fox News in Washington. Another week of hopes dashed for a White House trying to bring its policy successes to the forefront as the war on Ukraine dominates headlines. The U.S. is sending millions in new security assistance as Russia presses the besieged city of Mariupol and prepares for more clashes in the east. At home, Americans continue to feel the brunt of higher prices, and a rise in COVID cases is raising concerns about the return of restrictions just as summer arrives. This as lawmakers gear up for bruising midterm battles. In a moment, we will speak with House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy. But we begin in team coverage this morning. Matt Finn live in Ukraine, where we could see fighting intensify this week. But first to Lucas Tomlinson, live at the White House. Lucas?
Mike, the White House announced it's sending more weapons to Ukraine. President Biden says the economy also needs reinforcements.
We need to address these high prices, and urgently.
President Biden traveling to North Carolina and Iowa this week as inflation surged to a new four-decade high of 8.5%. The president's approval rating sinking to an all-time low of 33% as he struggles to deliver on key agenda items like lowering the cost of college, childcare, and prescription drugs.
We know from the top of our government through the ranks, we all recognize that we have the capacity to do much better.
With gas prices soaring across the country, the White House announced it would reverse course and allow new oil and gas leases on federal land, after the president signed an executive action just days after taking office, halting new drilling leases. The Department of Homeland Security said in a court filing Friday, encounters with migrants on the southern border now the highest in more than 20 years. And next month, the Trump-era public health measure that barred 1.7 million migrants from entering the country over the past 2 years will be repealed.
¿De dónde es? Venezuela.
Last week, Texas Governor Greg Abbott made good on his promise to start sending migrants here to the nation's capital on chartered buses.
The Biden administration and a lot of leaders in Congress have no idea about the chaos they have caused by their open border policy.
The expecting migrant surge this summer comes just months before the midterm elections. Mike?
Lucas Tomlinson reporting from the White House. Lucas, thanks very much. Now let's turn to Matt Finn in Struts, Ukraine, on the outskirts of Lviv. Matt?
Happy Easter, Mike. We are in the west.
So yeah, they did eventually go to a reporter in the outskirts of Lviv, and remember, Lviv's all the way in the west of Ukraine, close to Poland. I mean, I can't really criticize Fox News for not having a reporter closer to the action after their reporter Benjamin Hall was seriously injured. I talked about that after I showed his last news report several weeks ago. The camera person and the producer with him both were killed. I think he lost like a foot on one side and a foot and part of a leg on the other side, and a loss of like vision in an eye. And so you can't fault Fox News reporters for not being where the action is in Ukraine. I can fault Fox News for deciding to do all that political stuff and then going to Lucas Tomlinson at the White House before even really going to the reporter in Ukraine, even if he is in the outskirts of Lviv. And I think what I pre-criticized the clip, what I said before you watched it, turned out I'm not saying that those aren't issues: inflation, gas prices, food prices, the oil leases, immigration. I mean, I don't know. That issue I talked about more last week when I showed a clip on that and talked about the Biden's border crisis not really being a border crisis. It's a refugee crisis from the people who live in the Northern Triangle countries in Central America and are facing really difficult, all the Ukrainians going, there are like millions of Ukrainians who are in Poland and other countries in Europe, and it's not a border crisis, it's a Russian invasion crisis. And I don't know why we don't look at the refugees coming to our border like that. And anyway, I'll talk about that a little more when I get to the final clip, because that's something Kevin McCarthy's talking about, whether they should impeach Biden for not being tough enough on the border. But you saw all the Republican talking points really emphasized in the very, that's the beginning of the program, other than the teaser, which I'll show you in a little bit. But the final news summary is the shortest one. It's like just about 90 seconds. CNN's State of the Union, Jake Tapper doesn't have to hand it off to a reporter in Ukraine because for the second week in a row, he's in Ukraine, in Lviv, and he also traveled to Kyiv to interview President of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, and he pretty much gave over the entire program to that interview. One of the interesting things about the interview is, like, every now and then President Zelensky would speak English. Most of the time he was speaking with a translator. The clip I chose for you about nuclear weapons, I think it's about 2/3 in English, and then he goes back into, I assume, Ukrainian, and there's a translator for that part. I almost decided to show you all the English things he said in the interview, because it was kind of interesting what he chose. And you can go down and watch CNN's State of the Union at the link I put in the video description under sources if you want to watch the whole interview. But here's the part where, and do you know that the director of the CIA is Mr. Burns? I don't know, do you think that's excellent. I can't do a Mr. Burns impression, but the CIA, this clip starts off with Jake Tapper talking about the CIA director, Mr. Burns, and what he said about Vladimir Putin possibly using nuclear weapons in Ukraine, and then you can see Vladimir Zelensky's reaction, mostly in English, over here.
The director of the CIA warned...
Oh, wait. I was going to show you the news summary, then the Vladimir Zelensky interview. First, here's Jake Tapper's CNN State of the Union news summary that's 90 seconds. Almost skipped a clip here, and then I'll get you to the Vladimir Zelensky talking about Mr. Burns. But here's a CNN State of the Union news summary from Jake Tapper yesterday morning over here.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Lviv, Ukraine, and you're watching a special hour of State of the Union. Happy Easter and happy Passover to those who celebrate. This weekend is one of hope for so many, but here in Ukraine, where it's been more than 50 days since Russian troops invaded, the destruction, frankly, seems limitless. Yesterday, while traveling across the country, I saw buildings, homes blown away in Borodyanka outside Kyiv. They're still digging bodies out from the rubble, bodies of families, bodies of children, families that ran to the basement of their buildings for shelter from Putin's bombs, and they did not make it. We saw their toys that had been uncovered in the rubble. This is the cost of Putin's unprovoked war on the people of Ukraine, and the end, frankly, does not seem near as the Russian focus moves to the east. The situation in Mariupol in the south appears to have grown increasingly dire. Overnight, Ukrainians rejected an ultimatum from the Russians to surrender. I traveled to Kyiv, and I sat down with Ukraine's president, Volodymyr Zelensky, inside the office of the president. It's no exaggeration to say that President Zelensky changed the course of the war and decidedly the course of history by deciding to stay in Kyiv, to command, to lead, to fight an army many times the size of his own. Today we're devoting the show to bring you that wide-ranging conversation, beginning with the very latest from the battlefield.
Russian warship.
Okay, so yeah, there you saw Jake Tapper, who actually fit some really, I thought that was well written, and for the 90 seconds was, I didn't think it had the emotive power of that much longer news summary from ABC I showed you first, but pretty good for the short time that Jake Tapper had there. And now I kind of pre-introduced the clip about the president of Ukraine responding to the U.S. CIA director William Burns, Mr. Burns, saying that Vladimir Putin of Russia may be planning to use nuclear weapons. And so I'll get to that clip and talk to you about it a little more after we watch it together over here.
The director of the CIA warned that he's worried Putin might use a tactical nuclear weapon in this fight. Are you worried?
Not only me. I think all of the world, all the countries have to be worried, because you know that it can be not real information, but it can be truth. Because when they begin to speak about one or another battles or involve enemies or nuclear weapons or some chemical, issues, chemical weapons, they should do it. They could do it. I mean, so they can. For them, life of the people is nothing. That's why we should think, not be afraid. I mean, not be afraid, be ready, but that is not the question to Ukraine, and not only for the Ukraine, for all the world. I think so. There
is a possibility of them using these weapons. Nobody expected there to be a full-scale invasion of Ukraine from the Russian Federation. No one expected there to be a war in 2014. And now that there will be a full-scale invasion and killing of civilians, nobody expected them to invade the areas where there is no military equipment and just kill and shoot dead the civilian population. Nobody expected that. But this is a fact, and it happened. And that is when Russia gives information and says if something goes not according to plan, they can use chemical weapons and their nuclear potential. And that is why I believe these are dangerous claims of untrustworthy people. And if we believe some of them are already untrustworthy, then they can use nuclear weapons.
How bad are things?
So there you saw the answer from the president of Ukraine about the use of nuclear weapons. And I am going to talk about this a little more, but first I want to show the Chancellor of Austria. Their constitution requires them to be militarily neutral. They're not part of NATO. And so the Austrian Chancellor, Karl Nahamer, however, I'm not sure how you pronounce his last name, but he went and he visited with Putin, and Chuck Todd asked him whether he thought that Putin was getting good information, and he said yes, but then he said that Putin thought he was winning. He talks about whether he thinks it's possible he could use nuclear weapons, and he gives a little bit of hope that maybe there could be some sort of negotiated peace earlier rather than later by the end of this clip, but I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Do you get the sense that Vladimir Putin is viewing reality in what's happening in Ukraine, or is he getting a dressed-up picture of the war?
No, I think he is now in his own war logic. You know, he thinks the war is necessary for security guarantees for the Russian Federation. He doesn't trust the international community. He blames the Ukrainians for genocide in the Donbas region. So, he is now in his world, but I think he knows what is going on now in Ukraine.
When you heard our CIA director talk publicly about the concerns that when Putin is cornered, he might do something like use a tactical nuclear weapon, the person you sat down with, do you think that's a person that might use a nuclear weapon?
It's a tough question. I think he knows that he has this weapon, and he knows the threat of this weapon. So I don't know if he really uses it, but he knows that he can threat the world with these weapons.
Does he believe he's winning the war or losing the war?
No, I think he believes he is winning the war.
Did he give a rationale? I mean, did he explain what makes it seem as if things are going better than what it looks like to the rest of us?
No, I couldn't say that. He sent me clear messages about his concerns. Yeah. But I think what is necessary to confront him all the time with that what is going on in Ukraine. I think this is necessary. At the end of our talks, he told me in German, it's better the war ends earlier than later. So I think he knows exactly what's going on now.
I want to talk about additional...
And then he goes on to ask him about sanctions to hurt Russia, but that's an interesting comment at the end. He said in German it's better to end the war earlier than later. I mean, I guess that's a good sign, but pretty much the rest of that answer was kind of disturbing, that he thinks he's winning. He thinks that, the Ukrainians are committing genocide in Donbass. He has, his own war logic and war, that reminded me of how I used to study military strategy. That, I was a history major and studied military strategy. I've talked about this multiple times since the war started. It made me think about this, one of these books we read. You can see this kind of beat up because this is the actual book I had in college, Edward Luttwak's The Strategy, the Logic of War and Peace, and it's kind of an interesting book. Edward Luttwak is not a liberal, but he does teach some lessons. That one of the things that there's actually some counterintuitive things in warfare, and this applies in other areas of life. Sometimes where you're fighting against an active opponent, sometimes like winning is losing. and losing is winning or whatever. Like, what I mean is, like, the more territory you take in a campaign, the longer your supply lines get, and the harder it is to maintain. You know, you can like have so much victory that you overextend yourself, and that leads to losing. And then there's this other thing where losing could be winning or winning could be losing. The contradictory logic, I think, has to do with this use of tactical nuclear weapons, where it looks like a lot of the NATO powers now have this goal of Ukraine actually winning this war with Russia's invasion. And that's one of the things that's happened in the last few days. You know, last week I showed that analysis from David Petraeus about how Russia was like moving, you know, took all of the forces from Kyiv and, you know, all of that northern area, moved them back into Belarus and Russia, and was like moving them east outside of the theater of the war, and was then going to bring them back down south and maybe trap some of these Ukrainian troops in pockets. But apparently the Ukrainian troops have already like pivoted and taken the initiative and like cut off some of those supply lines, or that's like the latest news I've seen. And so if Russia can't even last week I was talking about the May 9th anniversary of World War II, where Vladimir Putin wants to have some success, you know, saying that he's liberated the Donbass, and maybe that Mariupol bridge to the land bridge to the Crimea, and he can show some success with all that. And if that doesn't happen, I saw in the comments people asking, I think one of the was it Seal Beater? That's kind of a trollish name. Is that supposed to mean like you like to beat like seals? That, you know, that's sort of like a brutal thing to do, I guess. Is that? But asking one of my regular viewers, Seal Beater, asking if why would Russia use nuclear weapons? Well, the thing is, if they're losing so badly that they want to like take out a large amount of either a city that they couldn't take, like Kyiv, they could kill a lot of civilians there. They could use it on Ukrainian troops if they can't surround them and win the war that way. They could do, you know, an air blast of the tactical nuclear weapon. And the other thing is, there's been a lot of talk about how the Russian talking points that are coming out now is that this is a Russian war not against Ukraine, but against the NATO, US, Ukraine neo-Nazis, or whatever they're saying in Russia. And they want, you know, because they have to explain how, the Russian flagship got sunk, and the Russian invasion is like going so badly. And especially if they can't even take Donbass, well, the way to do that is to bring in the NATO powers using chemical weapons or biological weapons or tactical nuclear weapons. All those things are likely to bring in other powers that Vladimir Putin then can blame for why the mighty Russian military was not able to successfully meet these war aims. And this next clip is actually the Democratic Senator Chris Coons from Connecticut talking to Margaret Brennan on CBS News' Face the Nation, where she asks him about remarks he's already been making just about the brutality of what's going on in Ukraine, that maybe U.S. troops should already get involved, even without that type of nuclear or biological or chemical escalation. And I'll talk about that clip a little more after we watch it together over here.
In some public remarks this week, you said the country needs to talk about when it might be willing to send troops to Ukraine. You said if the answer is never, then we are inviting another level of escalation and brutality by Putin. Are you arguing that President Biden was wrong when he said he would not send troops to Ukraine? Are you asking him to set a red line?
Margaret, I think those of us in Congress who have a critical role in setting foreign policy and in advising the president in terms of his decisions as commander-in-chief need to look clearly at the level of brutality. This is a moment of enormous challenge for all of us. And I deeply respect President Biden's leadership in pulling together the West, in imposing crushing sanctions on Russia, and in bringing to this fight countries that had stayed on the sidelines before. I think President Biden's leadership has been steady and constructive, but this is a critical moment. If Vladimir Putin, who has shown us how brutal he can be, is allowed to just continue to massacre civilians, to commit war crimes throughout Ukraine, without NATO, without the West coming more forcefully to his aid, I deeply worry that what's going to happen next is that we will see Ukraine turn into Syria. The American people cannot turn away from this tragedy in Ukraine. I think the history of the 21st century turns on how fiercely we defend freedom in Ukraine, and that Putin will only stop when we stop him. I'll close with this, Margaret. This is a weekend when so many families gather to celebrate the very best in the human spirit. And where we grieve the loss of many due to COVID, we should also be prayerful and mindful of those who are fighting for freedom in Ukraine and how much their heroism and patriotism inspires the rest of us.
Senator Coons, thank you.
I don't really appreciate like sort of the military religious connection that Chris Coons, onward Christian soldiers. And I mean, I'm not a Christian, but I don't remember Jesus being much of a warrior, although I guess he did get in a couple little, there was like the money changers in the temple and then something that happened in hell, or I can't, whatever. Like I said, I'm not a Christian. I don't know those stories that well, but that's not the teachings of Jesus and Easter that I remember, like the fighting part. But I don't know what you think of Chris Coons there and the idea that the U.S. should send troops to Ukraine at this point. That's not even what they're asking for. It seemed almost like we might be sending Joe Biden to Ukraine. I think there might be like a surprise Biden trip to Kyiv to meet with President Zelensky, like a lot of other leaders. That's something that might possibly happen. But anyway, I want to get to these last couple clips, which I don't know, there's kind of a Ukraine motif. These are the two like Fox News bias clips that I promised. First, I want to show you the very beginning of the Fox News Sunday program, where it looked like they're like, I call this like Biden bad, Kevin McCarthy good. This whole thing where they try to make Biden in trouble, and then they show multiple pictures of Kevin McCarthy, they make it almost sound like he was in Ukraine. He never even went to Ukraine, by the way. He was in Europe. I think he went to Poland and a couple other European countries. They don't actually say he went to Ukraine, but the editing kind of makes it look, and then they make him look like really, I don't know. In my opinion, Kevin McCarthy doesn't really look like a strong leader. I'm not a big fan of Kevin McCarthy. He's the leader of the Republicans in the U.S. House of Representatives. He's from California. He's from Bakersfield. I don't think he's all that smart. I don't think he's all that moral. I think he'd pretty much do anything he can do to become the next Speaker of the House, and there's actually a good chance he will be the next Speaker of the House. But anyway, here's Fox News Sunday doing their job as the Republican propaganda outlet to pump up Kevin McCarthy. This is like the first 49 seconds of Fox News Sunday yesterday over here.
The president struggles to reboot his domestic agenda against the backdrop of midterms and war in Ukraine. Inflation hits a 40-year high, and the president's poll numbers sink as consumers face higher prices for gas, groceries, and travel. The White House blaming Russia for the surge.
Putin's invasion of Ukraine has driven up gas prices and food prices all over the world.
And lawmakers travel to Europe, pressing the White House to do more for Ukraine as Putin pivots to the east. We'll ask House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy about Ukraine, inflation, midterms,
and Republicans' chances to win back the House. It's a Fox News Sunday exclusive. Plus...
So what do you think? Were they pumping up Kevin McCarthy after trying to knock down Biden in the first minute of the program? I think they were. And then here is like maybe the toughest of all the softball questions that Mike Emanuel asked Kevin McCarthy. This is about whether... I say it's the toughest of the questions because he's saying, you know, some House Republicans say if you take back the majority and become Speaker of the House, that the House will impeach Biden for, you know, the stuff at the border. And that's kind of a tough question because most Americans probably don't want that to happen. And he doesn't even make him like deny that that's going to happen. He lets him get away with saying the Republicans is the rule of law party after the whole January 6th thing, which he never asks him about. He also, before this, he let Kevin McCarthy get away with these like pretty weak Republican talking points about Biden should have done more faster in Ukraine. That's except for like the pro-Putin wing of the Republican Party. That's the, you know, more mainstream Republican talking point that, you know, whatever he's doing is not enough. It should have been, you know, and he even says like before the war, if he'd done more, it wouldn't have even happened. But then in this clip I'm about to show you, he lets the Fox News host lets Kevin McCarthy get away with referring to Trump's first impeachment, which I believe was about holding up aid to the Ukraine. He calls it like a phone call and lets him mix it in with Russia collusion. And then he even lets him talk about Yemen in regard to immigrants at our southern border without ever, he talked about the brutality in Ukraine, never even asked him about the brutality in Yemen. And I've pre-criticized the clip, but this is the last newsmaker clip of the program that I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Republicans in the majority.
You say Republicans won't try to impeach President Biden for political purposes, only if he breaks a law. But at least a dozen House Republicans signed on to impeachment resolutions over his handling of the southern border. Congressman Bob Good says, quote, "How can we not impeach this president for his purposeful violation of his Article 4, Section 4 constitutional responsibility to protect the states from invasion?" What are you telling them about their resolution?
Well, theirs is very clear. They believe in the rule of law as well. We're not playing political games about some phone call what somebody thought are made up Russia collusion. What we're looking at is real policies about that's harming America. Today you have an administration that tells every American flying they have to continue to wear a mask, but now he looks at the border and raises Title 42. And to your viewers, what that means is if a border agent finds somebody coming across the border illegally, they send them back to their country. He wants to lift that in a time that we have COVID as well. That's irresponsible in his policies moving forward, but we will always go to the rule of law, and wherever it rises, we will hold him accountable to that. But we have tried to make sure that he does not lift Title 42. We have a number of Democrats, but we have a discharge petition that only needs a couple handful of Democrats to sign, and it can pass the floor. This is what we need to make sure to protect not just our border from illegal immigration crossing in this crisis, but this is where the fentanyl is coming from China and others. Plus, we are catching people on the terrorist watch list from Yemen and other countries coming into our nation. We want to make sure we're safe. You know, it's a simple principle. If Americans do not feel safe, nothing else matters. And that's really becoming in doubt. That the question for the next election will be, can we afford it? Can we afford these democratic policies, not on just on the border, when it comes to inflation, when it comes to crime, when it comes to gasoline, when it comes to foreign policy? In a short time frame that they've had one-party control, we have inflation higher than we've had in 40 years. We have gasoline prices higher than we've ever had before. The disrespect around the world based upon this president's actions and lack thereof on foreign policy. We have children on streets and neighborhoods that feel unsafe anymore. That has got to stop. And the only way we can do that is going to the polls, firing Pelosi, and sending a really clear message.
There are some high-profile moderates deciding not to run for re-election. I want to read a quote.
So you see, he's like totally pivots to who the moderates not running for re-election. Why are the moderates leaving the Republican Party? But never really brings up reasons why moderates might be leaving the Republican Party, or cross-examines like that whole like ocean of bullshit you just heard from Kevin McCarthy, you know, about the phone call and Russia collusion, and he wasn't ever even impeached for Russia collusion. It was like holding up aid to Ukraine until the Ukraine would dig up or say they were trying to investigate Biden. And then, you know, the second impeachment was for January 6th insurrection, and the speech before the January 6th insurrection didn't ask him about that, let him get away with saying rule of law, all that stuff. Anyway, I don't want to go into all that. I actually have a meeting that starts in 4 minutes trying to help plan a district attorney candidate forum coming up at the end of the month that I've talked about sometimes, so I got to finish up. But I did want to thank all the live viewers for showing up. I wanted to thank Lulu Girl for that super chat contribution along the way. I appreciate all the support for my channel, just even like the nice supportive comments, but the super chat contributions, there are links right at the top of the video description if you want to be a monthly supporter on Patreon or a one-time supporter on PayPal. I always appreciate that support since a lot of my videos get demonetized and I don't make a lot of ad revenue anymore. But before I finish up, I also do want to give you the bonus Dash clip to finish the show. My cat Dash, for fans of Dash out there. Last week I showed Dash drinking at the faucet, and you may wonder how do you know that Dash wants to drink at the faucet? And this final clip, you can see what Dash does in the bathroom to let you know he wants to drink in the faucet more and more these days in a kind of annoying way. Over here. So that's the Dash clip to finish the show. I've got a meeting coming up in like 90 seconds, so thank you all for joining me. I'll be back next Monday and every Monday through the November midterms, which, as Fox News said, and I can't disagree with, aren't looking good for Biden and the Democrats right now. But who knows? Things could change, and if they do, I'll talk about it with you next week or whatever week it happens. And until then, I guess I'll be seeing all of you around the internet.